Out of all the drawing tools, probably the most important one is the brush tool. And there's a couple of shortcuts that you need to know for the exam. The most useful shortcut is to change the size and hardness together, is Ctrl and Alt held down together, and then clicking on the canvas, you will get this little preview of your brush. And if you drag right, you will increase the size of the brush. If you drag left, you decrease the size. And by dragging down and up, you can change the hardness. Dragging up will decrease the hardness, and dragging down will increase the hardness of your brush. You can also do the same thing, change the size of your brush with the square bracket keys. That's also another fast and easy way to change the size. You can pick a color by holding down Alt and clicking on a color. And the color picker will also show you the previously selected color, so you can match the two colors. As you can see here, I show you before and after. The one at the bottom is the color I selected before, and the one on the top is the color I'm going to select now. But there's also another option called the hot color picker, the heads-up display color picker, which is Control, Alt, and Command held down together, or Control Alt Shift on PC and then click, and this will give you this heads-up display for selecting a color. And if you want to change the preferences for it, you can find that in the general options. So there's the hot color picker, and you can choose different options here. To quickly switch between the brush tip shapes, you can use full stop and comma. So that will cycle through quickly the brush tip shapes you have in your brush library or brushes panel. And you can also change the opacity of your brush with a keyboard shortcut. If you press 5, for example, that will quickly switch to 50. 7 will be 70. And if you type in, let's say, 65, then that will be 65. 0 will switch back to 100%. And if you want to change the flow, that you can change with Shift and the number. So Shift 5 will change the flow to 50%. And you might ask, what's the difference between flow and opacity? Well, that's again something you need to know for the exam. If I use both of them at 100%, it will look like this. If I use the opacity at 50%, and it will look like this. So even if I draw back and forth, it will stay 50%. And this is how it looks when I set the opacity back to 100% and the flow to 50%. So you can see in this case, I'm keep adding color. It will start from 50%, but then it will keep adding more color to it. And there's one more option, the airbrush, which will do the same thing, but even if I keep my brush at one position. So if I set the flow, for example, to 6%, and I start holding down my brush, then the paint will build up eventually, even without me moving it anywhere. So that's the opacity, flow, and airbrush options explained. You should also know about the eraser tools. There's 3 of them. There's the magic eraser tool, for example, which can work like the magic wand and deleting pixels and setting transparency on your layers. And then there's also the background eraser tool, which will try to find the edges. So if I draw over details, which has a higher contrast, it will try to find the edges automatically. The sponge tool is another drawing tool, which can be used for desaturating or saturating colors. And we also have the vibrance option, which is quite similar to the protect detail option. So if I have saturate selected, I can draw and add more intensity to colors. If I have desaturate, I can reduce the intensity of colors. And if you use the same tool, the sponge tool, on grayscale images, it's good to increase or decrease the contrast locally on them. There's another tool called the mixer brush tool, which can simulate realistic painting techniques, including paint wetness and mixing colors on the canvas. So you can see here on the top we have the very wet option selected, and I have this option turned off, the load the brush after each stroke. So it won't add the selected foreground color to my drawing. It will just simply start mixing colors together on the image itself. So it's a bit similar to smudging the image, but it can simulate painted effect like watercolor painting. The gradient tool is another drawing tool which is for creating gradual blends between colors or transparency. And for this tool we have lots of default settings which we can also expand with these. We have, for example, the neutral density presets or metals which you can append, which means it will be added to the default ones, or replace the basic ones if you click on OK. And once you add it, you can select any of them from here, like swatches. The pencil tool has a bit less options than the brush tool, and it doesn't have anti-alias on it. So if I start drawing and I zoom closer, you can see that there's stair stepping, so it's not smooth on the edges. But it has an option called auto erase, which means if I have a blank canvas and I start drawing with this tool and I draw over an area where I already have the same color that I use, then it will automatically erase it. So if I draw black and then I draw black here and then I start drawing over this part, it will automatically erase these parts. The blur and sharpen tools can be considered drawing or retouching tools. Do exactly what you think they will do. Blur tool will blur details, so we can use it to soften details. It's a great tool, for example, to get rid of noise in an image. Like here, for example, on the neck we have some noise. I can use the blur tool to get rid of that without losing much detail. It actually helps to get rid of that noise. And sharpen will increase the contrast on details. And for both of these tools we have the sample all layers option, which means you can use them non-destructively on separate layers. And then last but not least, you also have the smudge tool, which is quite similar to the mixer brush, which can drag details around and smudge them, very similarly to the mixer brush. But here you can also add the finger painting option, which will add the selected color and it will blend it into the details that you are drawing over. So these are mainly the things you need to know about the drawing tools for the exam. And last but not least, in the next video we are going to cover the vector tools of Photoshop.